can you imagine what the technology would be? Like you were just talking about humans here for millions of years, like 21 million years. Can you imagine what our technology would look like if we didn't go through the reset?
Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age Conversations covers changes in our climate due to a new and intensifying grand solar minimum. In the media, overlooking, downplaying, or burying cold weather changes occurring on our planet. This is in order to keep the global warming agenda steaming full speed ahead. I do this podcast and radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output, but very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time, cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the grand solar minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David Dubine.
This is also fascinating.
You're seeing what happened with the plasma coming down or ripping the Grand Canyon. So these things that you think might have been moved by water, I'm sure some were, but I am also of the volition that some were blasted by the plasma and the ion wind blowing those just as much if you have sand on a table and with a deep breath you can blow all the sand off the table. The same thing with the wind coming off that ion stream of plasma. You're seeing some of that same boulder formation out there.
Yeah, most definitely. We could tell there's something major that's happened. Major. And it just wiped out what was here. And it feels like I see signs of a civilization here. I really do. You know, Cindy does too. And we spend so much time out in the middle of nowhere. We just love to get deep out in the middle of the desert and to get off road and then to just hike and get where nobody's been, or at least nobody's been in a long time, to try to see if we could uncover things. And there's a ton of caves. There's a lot of caves here. I think a lot of people probably instinctively knew they had to, seek shelter. And I could see small pockets surviving here and here, but, it doesn't take too many to repopulate. It really doesn't. I wonder what we get down to, how few of humanity survives these times. But the other thing that's a big component is that I've been thinking about a lot lately is the fact that, maybe some of these people that understand these cycles, they've been inside through maybe 5, 10, 20 cycles. Imagine what their technology would be. You were just talking about humans here for millions of years, like 21 million years. Can you imagine what our technology would look like if we didn't go through the reset that everybody on the surface goes through?
And can you imagine the tech they would have if they were able to take their tech underground, knowing that these cycles came back and then they would come back emerged out as the super gods, but that's just the tech they took underground as the rest got reset on the surface. So even if we do that 4 times, that's 400,000 years of advanced technology right now that we are not seeing.
Honestly, the deeper we get into it, the more I feel that that's the truth.
Talk about intuitiveness. This is where my whole, I don't think about the information, just kind of comes to me and I see the same thing and it just kind of gleans in my blue. Oh, this is what it was, what it is. I see it. I don't think it different.
There's a feeling, there's a knowing, and it makes perfect sense. And when we look at these legends and we hear of these quote unquote gods intermingling with humans and having offsprings with humans and things like that, maybe they're us. But maybe they are people that have never lost the technology because they fully understand the cycles. They know, hey, we got about 100 years and then we got to go down inside again. And we have to stop mingling with, those topside. And there's a massive network of deep underground military bases here. And we've gotten that from contractors too that work here, and we've mingled with them, we've played pool with them, we've gotten a little tipsy with them to where they'll talk, and done so purposely. And just in this area alone, there's supposed to be 20 or 21 deep underground military bases. And there's a reason why these bases are in locations where the Native Americans talk about hidden underground cities of the gods and of more advanced beings. Time after time that you'll find one of our military bases at one of those entrances.
Because the way you describe what's considered quote unquote the gods, you just did that. The people who went underground and knew the cycle of cataclysm was coming, they took their technology, like imagine today, okay, we got a computer, we got a TV, we got LED light, whatever. And we go underground and we still continue to develop that with our scientists for 100,000 years. And then we pop back out. Or maybe they know once everything stabilizes during glaciation period, they pop back out. They would be what you just called the gods. That's it. They're just the people who went underground with the present day tech and developed it underground. While, we doing cape art up here, trying to figure it out, starting from scratch again. Those are what you consider the quote unquote gods. I don't think they are gods. I think they are the same, like you say, it's humans that went underground with the tech and understood it and escaped the cataclysm, lived there for a while with their underground growing and whatever, and came back up. Boom. They would be no different than us. They just had better tech. But they would appear as gods because their tech, you can imagine, even 500 years ago, if you had a laptop or an iPad and you went back 500 years ago and showed a king or a queen that, they would have dropped to their knees and worshiped you.
It'd be mind-blowing. I mean, think about where we're going to be in 100 years.
Yeah.
If we are here in 100 years. We're talking about 21 million years ago, right?
Well, again, you're talking about the Vedas, and, that's kind of where we're looking back at these scales that, go back into the original catalogers of our history. There's only a couple societies on the planet that have cataloged it that far back, India being one of them.
I don't know what the inside of the earth looks like or anything like that, but if we're going back to like the Miocene and before that, well, we know dinosaurs were enormous, and we know that it was a much warmer planet. And there was more oxygen. So what if these beings, I wonder if they went inside the earth and somehow they didn't have the changes that we had on the surface over time? Like, that was another thing I was going to bring up. Why are we bombarded with fear of global warming when, cooling is so much more deadly? Don't you agree?
I do, but the people and the things and the plants would have been giants back in that time. Marching forward, the amount of A, CO2 and B, oxygen and the magnetic field on our planet would have been, it's been changing since that time, weakening. There's less oxygen now than there was then. There's less CO2 now than there was then. The magnetic field's different than it was then. So even if they're under the earth, they would still be affected by all of these things. So perhaps they were giants at some time, but again, if they had the tech, they could replicate their own chambers underground. And I've heard some of these cities or pockets under the earth being, like 300 miles long, 200 miles wide, and like a mile deep. And if their tech was good enough, they could create their own synthetic magnetic fields under there to replicate the same conditions. So it wouldn't surprise me if they had the optimal condition, the optimal size, and then they replicated that underground for a certain amount of people for the carrying capacity of what they're replicating. Yeah, no, maybe some of the gods are worse, bigger anatomically than the rest after some of these things have stepped down over the Ice Age periods.
So when we look at the Vedas and the Hindu holy books, they talk about our lifespans. When we're in the Satya Yuga, which is kind of the golden age, then the human's lifespan is 1,000 years or more. And as we head back into the Kali Yuga, it gets all the way down to around 38 years. Right now we're in the Dwapara, and our life is 70, 80 years, typically, depending on where you are across the globe. So what if these beings are in there, inside the earth, and they're living for 1,000 years without dying? Again, that gives them more opportunity to build the tech. Maybe they're living longer even inside. Even the whole thought of aging, when we look at it, it's about telomeres shortening. And as the telomeres shorten, then we get to the point where eventually we age and we die. But if we could stop the telomeres from shortening, we could kind of live on indefinitely. When we look at lizards and amphibians that can lose a tail, regenerate, we should be able to do that too. It's fascinating to just look into all these different aspects of it.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. I just watched a Vice program on exactly that, stopping aging and possibly reversing it just a few days ago, because the way they were
Well,
talking,
yeah,
the aging process, I saw it getting a little shorter, a little shorter, a little shorter. And I was like, you know what? That could be engineered as well. Perhaps, because these Anunnaki stories are about the engineering of the human species, mind, gold, and all these things. Fine. But what if they knew that and they engineered that it would decrease and decrease? But the natural state of us without the engineering would have been perpetual telomeres like this, regardless of state of magnetic field or atmospheric oxygen or CO2 concentrations. But the telomeres being engineered to be shortened could be something very different.
exactly. That's what I had brought up before in one of the lives. It was that the Anunnaki supposedly engineered us, and maybe it wasn't that they upgraded us and we were Homo erectus or Homo habilis. Maybe we were actually at a higher point. Maybe we were much more like them in some ways, and they engineered us down so that the telomeres will shorten. And the more I look into it, and health and fitness, wellness, qigong, that's really my thing. And I think it's part about keeping us into the dark, because I do think ultimately the ones that control our reality are not us. They're not the top dwellers, and they need to keep us in check, so to speak. Just fast regularly. If you fast, then your body goes into this process where it basically rejuvenates the cells. And the cells that can't be rejuvenated, it breaks them down, in essence, and it gets rid of them. But it goes into autophagy. If we give our body at least 16 hours, it'll start the process of autophagy, where it'll start to clean it out of all the free radicals and start to rejuvenate the cell. And if the cell can't be rejuvenated, then it will be basically broken down and the proteins will be used to create a new cell. And this is just a natural process. And so in the past, we didn't always eat every single day. And that was actually beneficial for us. And that's the way our bodies developed. A lot of people are doing a lot of intermittent fasting. But the system that you and I grew up in, that was, thought to be all American, 3 square meals a day, have your milkshake and your hamburger, have some French fries with that. The food pyramid, which was loaded with simple sugars, really grains and rice and things that break down really, really fast on the bottom, have 9 to 11 servings of those things. Those are going to cause a lot of inflammation. And you have to wonder if it's the way that the 1% controls the 99%. And maybe that 1% includes beings that are underground and have the higher knowledge, and they want to keep it to themselves, at least some of them.
And it's really that simple, and I was thinking about my own life, because when I wake up in the mornings, I don't eat until I get really, really hungry, where my stomach starts to growl. Like a lot of people would get up, and even if they're not hungry, really, they're just out of habit, they'll just eat because it's the morning. And the same thing in the evenings, I don't eat until I get really hungry. Like I try to stave that off. And even sometimes I'll be like, all right, I need to make dinner, but I want to finish this vid. And then it gets into the next hour and the next hour, and I still haven't eaten. And then I go, oh man, I'm getting more to kind of, headache hungry, where I really need to eat now. Versus, just pounding it in all those times every day. There's a huge difference. And I noticed, I don't get that sick either. So I was thinking, I haven't really planned or programmed into the fast every day, but I guess the way I eat is sort of into that first little bit. You're running through almost everything in the body before you're putting something else in it, versus just having it layered where there's always something in there to digest. And, your stomach and your intestines and your organs are always working to detox. Even though my mind is working, my body is getting a rest at some state, if you will.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, everything we were taught back, from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, it was really wrong. And a lot of it was completely backwards. So when we see things like fat-free this, fat-free that, fats are not our enemy. When it comes to inflammation, because inflammation is the root cause of most disease, carbs basically trigger inflammation. Now, as far as proteins, we need to utilize them, but not overutilize them, because they are taxing to the body. They actually will age you if you take in too many proteins. They will age you prematurely. That's why really, I mean, how many of the big old bodybuilders of the past do you see living into their 80s, 90s, or more? Usually the people that live into an advanced age are pretty thin for the most part. So caloric restriction, for instance, if you're usually eating about 2,000 calories and you take 30% off and get used to eating 1,400 calories, study after study shows you're going to probably live 6 to 7 years longer, and you're going to be healthier during that time period. Caloric restriction leads to a longer life, and it does probably have to do to the adaptations that our body has done over these long time periods and everything that we've gone through, but also just think of it simply as there's just more fuel to process. And so there's more gunk to clean out. And in this society where we have food available all the time, which we didn't back in those days when we were hunter-gatherers, we could be nibbling all the time now. Well, your body never has a time to clear out the cells. We're not giving our body time to get rid of the things that are diseased and the cells that are not properly functioning. And so we could simply do that by fasting on a periodic basis. It's so easy. Well, it could be challenging if you're used to a lot of simple sugars and if your body is super toxic. But once you get used to it, it's a piece of cake.
And some issues like this, I want to go deeper into thought, but I cannot on certain social media platforms. Join me on patreon.com/adapt2030, where I go in depth into the topics that keep you and your family climate prepared. Weekly videos and posts around relevant discussions, weaving together today's headlines so you get a much wider view of these fingerprints of the grand solar minimum, starting these ideas and thoughts so you can make great decisions and adapt and thrive during these changes, so you're really prepared with useful information and insights, practical advice. The end of the era seems to make no sense unless you understand this is a cycle. And the platform is a big help getting the research done. Releasing exclusives first on Patreon. 100% supported by you, so we can all share ideas moving through these changes. If you feel this would be helpful for understanding where our world's heading, join the Adapt Pack at patreon.com/adapt2030.
The first time I'll eat during the day is usually between 2 and 4. And usually we'll have something else around 8 or 9 and we'll be done. Sometimes we won't even have anything between 8 or 9, and we'll just basically eat in that 2 or 4 hour time frame and just have one meal. And often my workouts are done on a totally empty stomach, which at first it was tough to do, but now it's no big deal. And honestly, I feel like I'm functioning way better in the mornings because your mental clarity is so much better when you're used to functioning on the empty stomach. And then you start to realize that food really affects you in a big deal, mentally as well as physically. It can make you very, very foggy depending on what you're eating.
Yeah, it brings me back to that thought you just said about low-fat foods. Now, anybody listening out there, if you're buying a low-fat food in today's world in the supermarket and it says low-fat, that is filled with cellulose. And the manufacturers in today's world are allotted between 18 and 30% legally to fill a cookie in the middle of sugar cane. It has a real good pulp fiber in it because it's clear, it's white, it'll be transparent in a liquid, it can be blended with anything, it's tasteless. It fills the volume to give you the appearance of a full cookie. But if you were to have some kind of different telescopic vision that you could break down elements and look into the cookie, you would see that anywhere from 18 to 30% of that is cellulose. That's how they get you that fat-free or that low fat. We're not meant to break down cellulose. Termites are. Humans are not. You got to start looking at how much cellulose has been introduced into the human diet where you can still function. But over time, over a decade, your body continually getting cellulose, something foreign into the body that your body can't break down. Put that in decade after decade, your body is not going to be able to handle it, and you're going to start to show symptoms. What scares me is the lower we go on the food production globally, the more cellulose they're going to put into our food. So if you're looking into Congress in the United States currently, there's a whole food lobby that's trying to increase that maximum percentage of 30% cellulose up to 35% right now. So for me, that's a correlation and a validation that food production seems to be on the decline, where they're expecting food price rises, but they're going to want the food in the supermarket to appear the same size. So they're going to boost it with even more cellulose, because they found in the concentration camps, this is where mainly all this research came from, that they were able to boost cellulose to about 50% in the soups to keep people's belly full. But when they went over 50, severe health problems occurred. And when they were at 70, there was death. So they pulled it all the way back to 18 as the average. Your meat contains 3.5% of cellulose. So what you think might be meat fiber in some of these meat products, you might see a streak of white. That's fat mixed with cellulose to give it the appearance of a fat vein in there. Cellulose is not your friend, let's say that. So when you're looking at ingredients on a pack, if you see something with cellulose, understand that's wood pulp in your food.
And the artificial sweeteners are worse than just table sugar. But then we get into corn syrup and all that, high fructose corn syrup. Everything that they've come out with, it just seems to be progressively worse. But a lot of people are catching on to that. And if you go to a diet that is ketogenic, you'll feel way more stable. Not everybody will do good on a ketogenic diet, just from the standpoint that it's easy to do a ketogenic diet if you're eating meat. If you're vegetarian eating ketogenic, then it gets trickier. And if you're vegan, it's really hard. And everybody is unique, and everybody has a different blood type, and each blood type has a profound difference as far as food goes with the way food reacts in your body.
Yeah, that's so true. And again, come back to the Indian diets. They've all broken it down by body type and blood type of what type of food you should be putting in at what type of the day. See, this is all ancient knowledge that's been encoded, and I find it real fascinating that it's almost all been documented and recorded in India. That's the most interesting thing for me, is the ancient legends and also the diets and all these things that we consider we're just discovering. That's all been recorded thousands and thousands of years ago in Indian literature.
And the Indian thing is, my focus has been around that recently, because the deeper I go into the whole tradition and everything, the more I'm convinced that this is the leftover knowledge from the prior civilizations. I really do think so, and I even think that the Indus Valley civilization was a much more benevolent civilization, and I feel it was overrun by that Sumerian civilization, which is not a benevolent civilization, and which is the one we're living in right now. It's the culture that's dominating us right now, and that's the one where, you and I and the masses, we're just basically fodder. We're nothing. We're just a pain in the butt. We're the noisy ones of Enlil. Just let the asteroid hit, let them die in the flood. That's the culture that we are coming up in, where, the Indus Valley civilization was one of much greater knowledge, in my opinion, and much more antiquity as well. That's the one that says that God lies within every single living being. And there's no reason to worship really anything when you get down to it, because Source, God, is within every single one of us. And we all have the ability to connect to that divine. It's all through just simply going within. And also, the science of, say, Indian cooking is amazing, because now we know turmeric fights cancer. We know chili powder fights inflammation. We know cilantro is a heavy metal detoxifier. When you look at all these different herbs that were used in traditional Indian cooking, they're all about purifying the blood, pulling toxins out of the system. They're all about constantly detoxifying. Very scientific cooking, and it happens to be my favorite.
Except today, you go to India and everything's layered in oil.
That's sad, and that's true. So again, like with oils, we want to use like pure coconut oil, especially if you're cooking at a high heat. Olive oil is great on salads, things like that. There are healthy oils like avocado. Of course, it's sad when people are cooking in canola oil.
The ghee is amazing. Like, I never had ghee before, and then I was like in India eating food, and they had actual ghee that they were using. I'm like, damn, that stuff's pretty good, that ghee. And, I had one last thing here. One of your videos, like 100 stars disappear. And I was thinking about doing a video on this myself because I read those same news articles about 100 stars disappear. And now it's more than 1,000. It's upwards 1,200 stars have disappeared. Now, that's almost a false title that they disappeared. They're still there. But the electrical inflow to turn that thing to glow so we could see it with our naked eye, the current has stepped down on those stars. So if we're seeing that energy wave and all these stars are starting to dim, that thing's coming toward us. So when we're looking for these cycles in the sun, the Indian astrology, the Indian Vedas, and so many other cyclic patterns across our planet, and the Hopi and everybody else showing there should be signs in the skies moving forward, perhaps that's what they were really looking at too, is you could literally see this wave of step down in current turning off the stars. Now, to understand it in a better point than that, you have to go to David LaPointe's research, and they call the primer field. And also Rolf Witsche also talks about this in depth, about the current inflow, or the current sheath inflows. But it's all about that plasma with enough current in it to make it visibly glow or step down. And when we see all these stars stepping down in their current flow to dim, literally, they're still there. If you look at it in infrared, they're all still there. It's just visibly they're different.
David,
so
are they turning into red giants?
Nope, not at all. The current that's going in there to make that star glow to the point where you can see it with your eye is a certain amplitude and frequency of electrical input to make that thing glow yellow or blue or whatever color it is that they're seeing these stars disappear. Now, it's just like, those adjustable light bulbs that they're real cool in the coffee shops. Some of them are longer and they're winding, and you can adjust it and turn it down or turn it up in brightness where it's real bright white. Then you can turn it down where you can just barely see those glowing filaments inside the bulb there. It's the same thing. Like the electrical inflow into that can turn it brighter or turn it dimmer, depending if you turn it up or down. I am of the volition that the current is stepping down, this wave of energy coming toward us that's past all those stars already. Once the wave hits it, it's an energy wave, literally, that steps down the current flow into the stars that causes them to dim off.